Now, the South African citrus industry is breathing a sigh of relief. This is after the United States announced a tariff exemption on South African oranges. The Citrus Growers Association says this move restores the competitiveness in the U.S. market as a key destination that previously saw 4.3 million 15-kilogram cartons shipped in the last season. The citrus exports increased by 22% in the last financial year. For more on this, we joined on the line by Thabile Nkunjana, agricultural economist at the National Agricultural Marketing Council. A very good afternoon to you, Thabile. Good to have you with us on Africa in Business.
Good afternoon to you, Thami. It's always a pleasure having you on the show.
So what were the main citrus products that attributed to this growth? Could perhaps the 90-day pause on the U.S. tariffs have also contributed to this jump?
Yeah, certainly, Thami. The South African farmers were very much aware of the fact that this season was anticipated to be a very difficult one, specifically because of the tariffs. So the prolonged, in terms of the tariffs themselves being in effect in terms of the products that South Africa exports to the US. So those couple of months gave South African producers quite a some window to make sure that they push as much products to the US market as much as possible, and that was one factor. But another key factor was the fact that the other countries that normally sell their products to the US, the likes of Peru, Chile, and of course the northern hemisphere countries, which include the likes of Turkey, Morocco, and so forth, they saw their supply of product, their market ended a little bit earlier, than it was anticipated, and that, of course, it allowed South African exporters to sell because there was a larger demand of both processed, citrus products and generally the other juices that even South Africa does sell to the US. And of course, then that opened up a bit of more space. And given that South Africa also had quite a larger, products this year because of the good conditions in terms of the weather. And of course, we had some, stability a little bit in terms of the ports, where there's been reports in recent years of, inefficiencies. So those combinations, Tami, are the ones that kind of assisted South Africa to sell, the current products that we saw selling to the world, including to the US, even though I can tell you that some farmers, they did say that they have reduced the amount of products that they normally will sell to the US this season.
Right. So is this growth sustainable going forward, do you think?
That is a very uncertain, certainty around that time because of the fact that, the situation with the US, it remains quite a very fragile one. I think you are following in terms of what is happening as we are leading to the G20, in the next few days. There have been a lot of statements that have been made between both countries. And now in the business perspective, some of the statements, they don't really help in terms of, giving some stability in terms of sensing, in terms of what will happen in the next few, seasons. But the reality is, for South Africa specifically, and the products that include the likes of citrus, oranges, mandarins, the likes of grapes, which we are getting into the season for it now, and we do sell a lot of that to the US. So, and unfortunately, that product, specifically table grapes, is not part of the products that US recently sort of put in terms of reducing, removing the tariffs because they are seeing some issues in their domestic market. So it's going to remain quite a very interesting period to be able to say we have a stable market or relations between South Africa and the US for now. And that is something that we're always going to be hopeful it is going to settle, sometime, because remember, we also have some negotiations, particularly for some products that, remember we had a delegation that went to the US earlier, but things did not really settle. But then there were second, proposals to that. So it remains quite a fluid situation now. You can hold this direction, but then it spreads to other direction, because even the tariffs you're talking about, we didn't really expect not so long ago, but here we are today.
And on that very note, Thabile, do we know the main factors that led to the United States granting this exemption on oranges specifically?
Yeah. It was bound to happen, Thami. I remember that myself. I did, talk to you some time ago when these tariffs came in, and we did mention the fact that as much as countries will use these tariffs and other trading distortive measures to try to settle any score, as we have seen with the US trying to bring in this issue of reciprocal trade. The reality is that there's always going to be some unintended consequences. And specifically with the US now, it has been the fact that a lot of their consumers are complaining about the number of products, including the likes of beef, which is part of the products that have been exempted, the citrus, oranges, some cocoa, which includes the issues around chocolate, some bananas, tomatoes, pineapples. It's a whole list, and that list they saw the fact that their food inflation was kind of increasing, in a manner that a lot of consumers in the US are not really able to afford their food. And that's one thing that you always said from the get-go, that as much as they want this, but it's not really going to help the US, especially the consumers, because some of the products, including our oranges or other citrus, they are counter-seasonal to the US. So meaning when they are ready for the market, the US doesn't have them that time, which is why they've been consistently increasing the amount of the products that they are buying from South Africa.
So what is the likely effect of this tariff exemption on export volumes, specifically in the coming season, the 2026 season, now that the tariff pressure has somewhat eased?
Yeah, so I think for this year season, time is the fact that the bigger crops, that will normally make a lot of revenue generation, specifically from South African producers. It includes, citrus, and that season is over now. And then our key concern for now is going to be table grapes. As I was saying to you, that we are to start the table grapes marketing season, which runs until early next year. And a lot of our grapes, at least not necessarily a lot, but larger quantities of grapes, we do sell to the US. And unfortunately, they are not in part of the products that have been listed to be exempted for the current tariffs. And that's one thing that we feel like is going to probably, affect, or impact the South Africa's, export, at least in a shorter term, as far as this season is concerned, because we're already in November, so we have a few weeks. But generally, the producers, they do get a little bit of what they sell to the US, unfortunately for them. But the general point is that we have pushed a lot of our products that would normally sell, to the US, including macadamia. For macadamia per year, per month, we can export exports worth around 40 million to 50 or even more, depending on how much we have. So we are already in November, and we feel like a lot of those products have already been sold, to the US. But unfortunately, for now, we cannot give very specific numbers or details in terms of how that is going to be. But it's likely that there's going to be a bit of an impact in terms of overall exports to that US market.
We focused on some of the other products that are exempt from the tariffs. You've mentioned bananas, beef, tomatoes, potatoes. But as far as citrus varieties are concerned, apart from oranges, are there any other citrus varieties that also are exempt?
Yeah, so it includes others, limes, but now the tricky is gonna be which products that suffer. Because for instance, mandarins, they have been one of the larger product citrus that we will sell to the US, and they are not necessarily part of that. But we are hoping, because as part of also the negotiations we're having, and also what I was telling you in terms of us having a counter seasonally, in terms of the period where the US has domestic production or supplies available, than the period that South Africa will sell the products to. So those are some of the products, but specifically, it is limes when it comes to go to citrus and mandarin, and oranges. That now covers, the citrus, basket of products. But unfortunately, for the likes of mandarins, they're not part of that. But we are hopeful that maybe even if they're not going to be part of it, perhaps from the trade negotiations that the country is trying to engage the US with, probably they will reduce, the tariffs if they cannot necessarily remove them. But for now, as I was saying to you earlier on, the situation remains quite sticky. And for one to say what can really happen, nobody can really predict, the outcomes of it.
And what's quite positive there is the fact that it doesn't really seem to be a closed door. It seems like, the negotiations are quite fluid and things can change in any moment. Thabile Nkunjana, we thank you so much for your commentary this afternoon.
Thanks, Thami.
Thank you. That's Thabile Nkunjana, agricultural economist at the National Agricultural Marketing Council.